So for our final class this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over the questions that I assigned on Wednesday, and from the notes I'm going to talk through how I would answer the questions. So the first question that I gave you was on what effect will an increase in price for a complementary good have on the demand for a product? I explain your answer with an example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to briefly chat through, because some of these could have been difficult enough to understand, particularly this one. And it's just, I kind of wanted to give out a long range of questions, and I suppose this one is kind of maybe a bit complicated at the time. This was our slide to do with price of complementary goods. So what we're looking at here is, first of all, understanding what a complementary good is. Complementary good is a product that is used with another product. In some cases, consumer need to buy both. For example, printers and ink. So let's just think of printers and ink as our example. Okay, so what will happen if an effect will increase in price for a complementary good having the demand for the other? So let's just say ink. Ink is a complementary good because obviously it complements the printer. If you buy a printer, you need to buy ink. And if you buy ink, in most cases, more often than not, you might be operating some form of a printing operation. So if the price of ink goes up a lot, what will happen on the demand for printers? Let's just take an extreme example, okay, just to make this as easy to understand as possible. Usually the price of ink might be, let's say, €40 for a certain amount of ink. Ink is actually the most expensive liquid in the world, if you didn't know. It's quite expensive, but let's just say that the price of ink is €40 for a certain size cartridge. If that €40 was to go up to €400, what do you think would happen for the demand for printers? So if you wanted to have a printer at home, and obviously you need ink in order to print anything off, what would happen if the price of ink went from €40 up to €400? I know what I'd do. I'd sell my printer, because I'm not paying €400 for a carton of ink. So if the price of a complementary good goes up, the demand for the printer is going to go down. Okay, so the price of complementary good goes up, the demand for the good will go down. So if the price of ink goes up, the price of printers, or the demand for printers, is going to go down. Why? Because if I have to pay €400 for ink, I'm not going to buy a printer, and I'll probably sell the one I have because I'm not paying that much money in order to print something off. So that was the first one. The second one we looked at is identify two reasons why demand curve for a product might shift to the right. So we had looked at demand curves, and this was our demand curve here. We can see that when the price is really high, the quantity demand is low. So why would it shift to the right? What we shift to the right here is increase in demand. So it can be affected by a number of factors. So what are some of the reasons why it might shift to the right? Well, we have a bunch of these here. If the price of the substitute goes up, price of complementary goods, but let's look at these ones because they're a little easier to understand. So if the demand curve moves right, it means there's an increase in demand. So what reasons might there be for an increase in demand? And we have a few here. So advertising. If you advertise something, generally the demand for it might go up. Fashion sense or fads or anything like that. So if something becomes some way fashionable, generally demand goes up. If there's more people in the population, the demand will go up. And that's just the final one. We'll just look at seasonal factors. So at certain times of the year, so I mean, why would the demand for, or why would the demand curve move right, which is an increase in demand for Easter eggs this April? Well, obviously, you know, Easter is coming, so Easter eggs are going to sell for a much higher price in April than they will in June, because obviously loads of people are buying them. So that's one of the a couple of reasons why the demand curve might move right. The next one we had was define supply, which is quite straightforward from our notes. Supply is the quantity of a product that a producer is willing to sell at a given price, but that's our definition of supply. We had a few more questions. The next one was outline the relationship between the level of supply for a good or service and its price. So the relationship between the level of supply for a good or service and its price. And we can see, we'll look at this first, give an example for your understanding. So the relationship between the level of supply, which is quantity supplied, and the price. What happens here? Well, we can look at this here and see that as the quantity supplied goes up, what happens to the price? So if my quantity supplied was 80, my price is 50. As my quantity supplied goes up to 120, what does my price do? It goes up from 50 euro when it was 80, and now we're at 120. It's gone all the way up to 150, so the price has gone up quite a lot. So the relationship between quantity supplied and price is that when quantity supplied goes up, price goes up. And I can appreciate that, you know, by the way, we will quickly look at this again when we go back to school, but I can appreciate that sometimes this can be hard to understand. So I'm forever talking about Ed Sheeran this week, but let's just stick with the same example we have, just so that you know it's the same example. I talked about, you know, the quantity supplied of concerts. So you know, as I said, if Ed Sheeran was going to come to Ireland to do a tour, how many days will he supply? How many concerts will he give? How many nights will he supply across the country? So if he can get only a small price of 50 euro or 50,000, let's say, which would be small for Ed Sheeran, if he could only get 50,000, he might only supply 2 nights. So you'd see that the line would start here. But if you know, different companies in Ireland could give Ed Sheeran 200,000, instead of supplying 2 nights, he might supply 10 nights. So he might supply 10 nights. So we can see straight away that if we were only giving him 50,000, he'll only, you know, he'll only have a 2-day concert. But if we can give him 200 grand, he's willing to do a 10-day concert. So what's the relationship between the amount of concerts he'll supply and the price? What's the change? He's going to basically sing longer. He's going to go on tour for longer if he gets more money. He's going to supply more concerts for a bigger price. So that's our relationship, and that's how we'll explain the 11th question there, the relationship between supply and the price. So the supply goes up if the price goes up. So that's the relationship. If he gets paid more, he'll supply more. The 4 factors that determine the level of supply, determine the supply of a product other than price. So we're looking for 4, this is the 13th question. We're looking for 4 factors that determine the supply of a product other than price. Where could we find that? Other factors affecting supply. So these are, as we are looking for, factors affecting supply other than price. We have environmental conditions. So this would be a factor. It's not price, but it's another factor that affects supply. If we have a bad sequence of weather and certain crops are impacted because of the weather, that'll affect supply. If production and development costs go up, it'll probably reduce supply. If it costs more to produce something, there'll probably be less items produced. Technology generally increases how much supply we can have. Because as I said, if you have a machine to make something, you can make it all day long, all night, 24/7. Never stops. Whereas if you have to pay people to do it, it's much more difficult, it's a much more slower process. So technology speeds everything up. And we'll look at number of suppliers. Obviously, if you've more shops in a town, the supply goes up. So these are other factors affecting supply, and they're not price. The number of suppliers is 1. If you have a town and the town only has 1 shop, it has 1 SuperValu and no other shop, that means there's only a certain amount of goods you can buy in that town. And if 100 people in the town want to buy milk and there's only 50 cartons of milk there, then there isn't enough milk for everybody. So if you have a second shop opens up and now you have a SuperValu and an Aldi, now there's more supply. So that's a factor that will affect supply other than price. It's the number of people that are supplying, and that's quite obvious. Again, the one I gave an example earlier was in the school canteen. If one person came in selling cookies and they were making a lot of money, well, you've only a certain amount of cookies that are for sale. What other factors will affect the supply of cookies? What happens if a second person comes in and starts selling cookies? You could potentially double the amount of cookies that are for sale. So that's affecting the supply. The question number 14 was their understanding of market equilibrium in relation to demand and supply, and this was new. And again, I will quickly go over the stuff when we go back. Market equilibrium is the price point at which quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So what we're looking at here, we had said, and I wanted to go over this anyway, about finding a balance between demand and supply. So in the marketplace, supply and demand interact until a balance or equilibrium position is reached. So we'll look at this here. Supply and demand. This is our supply line and this is our demand line. And we found here that when these two lines meet, it's called equilibrium. And the equilibrium point is basically when demand and supply are the same. I'm going to send on a video talking to more detail and concrete examples, because it explains it very well. I feel like it'll be kind of just an alternative way for you to learn about it. But for right now, we're just looking at market equilibrium is the point at which supply and demand meet. And it's that point where they're the same. So that's market equilibrium. Now, the final part of the homework that I had given was this little section here. I'm going to zoom in a small, but it might be small writing. So there's this company called New Chapter, and they're a bookshop. And this is their demand and supply curve. So this is the demand and supply curve for the Great Irish Weather Bookshop, New Chapter. So this is the supply line and this is the demand. So if they have a price of €8, they'll supply 20 books. If the price is €24, they'll supply 100 books. Opposite for demand. If the price is €8, there's 100 people wanting to buy the book. But if the price goes up to €24, there's only 20 people wanting to buy the book. So the bookshop wants to make as much money as possible. So they'll want to sell it here. They'll want to sell it up 24. They'll want to sell it here. They'll want to supply as much as possible for a high price. But there's only very few people willing to pay. There's only 20 people willing to pay for a book that costs €24. So what happens is you generally end up moving until you meet the equilibrium point, which we had discussed earlier. Market equilibrium. But the question we were asked to find here is indicate the quantity supplied when the book is €20. So it's quantity supplied. So supplied is the S line. What is the quantity supplied when the price is €20? Well, let's look at the price. The price is €20. Let's go across here to the orange line, because this is our supply line. So when the price is €20, the quantity supplied is 80. So the quantity supplied when the price is €20 is 80 books. Because we had looked at the supply line. What happens when the cost is €20? Go across here and go down. There's 80 books supplied. What about the quantity demanded at €80? Well, the demand line is different. The demand line is the blue line. It's the line D. So the quantity demanded when the book costs €8, we just simply go to this 8 mark here for the price, because we're looking at the price. When the price is 8, let's go across this time to the blue line, because that's the demand line. So when the price is 8, what's the quantity demanded? So this is our demand, and let's go down, and the answer is 100. So it's 80 for the first one and 100 for the second. When the price is €8, the demand is 100 books. Finally, indicate the equilibrium price of the Great Irish Weather Book. What did we say equilibrium was again? Equilibrium, I'll have to scroll out here. Equilibrium is the point at which quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. It's that point. So what's our equilibrium point here? Our equilibrium point is going to be this one. But what's the equilibrium price? The equilibrium price is across here, and the equal demand is across here, because this is our demand, our quantity demand, and this is our price line, our y-axis. So what's the equilibrium price? Well, this is the equilibrium point. The equilibrium price is €16. So €16 is our equilibrium price. Very last questions were just a little kind of story. Again, I want you to think of extreme examples, because it's just easier to understand. So we're looking at New Chapter. A New Chapter is an award-winning traditional, I'll have to scroll up a little here. So it said that New Chapter is an award-winning bookshop. So they're a bookshop, okay? So what impact would the following have on the demand for books in the New Chapter bookshop? So what would happen to the demand in this bookshop? What would happen to the demand if there was a reduction in the price of the books? If you have a bookshop in Castleblaney and it's called New Chapter, what would happen if the price of the books went down? Would demand go up or demand go down? If you went into this bookshop inside in town and the price of books, suddenly all the books are for sale for €1, the demand is going to go up. Of course it is, because all the books are costing €1. So obviously loads of people are going to be willing to buy the books. So think of extreme examples if the price was to severely drop. So this is going to be, you'll tick this box here because obviously if the price goes way down, more people are interested in buying. So there's an increase in demand. What will happen with an increase in taxes? Taxes are going to make the book more expensive. So what happens if the books in this bookshop in town, what happens if the books become more expensive? Will there be an increase or decrease in demand? Of course there'll be a decrease because the price has gone from €20 maybe to €26. So an increase in taxes means the price goes up, and if the price goes up, book becomes more expensive. Generally, less people are willing to buy the book. I remember correcting the exams paper this year and I still don't understand why they put this in. There's a rollout of broadband to all areas in Wicklow. They gave both answers as correct. I don't necessarily know why they tried to correlate the two between broadband and the bookshop, maybe that people would read online, but they gave both as an answer. It was, to be honest, it shouldn't have been included. So technically you get, you got whichever box you ticked, it was correct, which is a terrible way of, this actually came up in the junior cert, so pointless. The last one is Eason's store opening in the town. So again, we're looking at the New Chapter bookshop. What would happen to this bookshop inside in town if an Eason's store, which is obviously Eason's is another bookstore, what would happen if another bookstore opened up? So there's already this bookshop in town. What would happen to demand for that bookshop if another bookshop opened up? Well, now there's two bookshops. So the demand for books in New Chapter will probably go down. So you'll have to say it'll go down here. Why? Because there's a second bookshop. So people have options now. So some people who would have always gone to the New Chapter bookshop might go to Eason's. And obviously the demand for books in New Chapter will now go down. That was the explanation of the homework in terms of I wanted to just go through the notes just to go into them in more detail because it's helpful for your understanding to be put on the spot with difficult questions because they were difficult questions to ask you to show your understanding, and I kind of wanted to do that just so I could go through the notes again and kind of apply them to the theory we had. Thanks for listening.